I don't know Jeffrey Epstein. I've never met Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not on a list. I was not on a plane or an island.
A lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, are really hoping that doesn't.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years' experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. This week, we are talking about a feud that's been making headlines for the last couple of weeks all over the media between late-night show host Jimmy Kimmel and NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers. It all started when Aaron Rodgers seemed to have made a very vague but concerning accusation about Jimmy Kimmel being involved with Jeffrey Epstein. To this, Jimmy Kimmel responded very publicly on his show and even threatened to sue Aaron Rodgers, who in return issued a response to Jimmy Kimmel's response. So there's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of interesting behaviors. Definitely some interesting stuff happening with the body language, but the word choice on this one is really important as well. And in this video, we're looking at all of it. What was really meant in that original statement? How genuine is the denial? And how authentic is the response? Lots going on, let's dive right in. Okay, before we look at any of the clips, let's go back and look at the sequence of events because context is really, really important here. So this whole thing actually started early last year in February of 2023 when on the Pat McAfee show, Aaron Rodgers made the statement that he believes the reason that there are a lot of news stories about UFOs and aliens is to distract away from the fact that a list was about to get released about the celebrities who were involved with Jeffrey Epstein on his disgusting island and the criminal activities that were going on there. On his late night talk show, Jimmy Kimmel poked fun of Aaron Rodgers for this speculation, that the two have anything to do with one another.
Needless to say, all this UFO talk has the tinfoil hatters going wild, including Green Bay whackpacker Aaron Rodgers, who offered this hot take on the Pat McAfee show.
Interesting timing on everything. There's a lot of other things going on in the world. Did you hear about the Epstein client list about to be released too?
What's that? What are you talking about?
There's some files that have some names on it that might be getting released pretty soon.
Oh.
Might be time to revisit that concussion protocol, Aaron.
Now, fast forward to January of this year, so just a couple of weeks ago, back on the Pat McAfee show, Aaron Rodgers made a pretty controversial statement when he said that there are a lot of people out there who don't want the list to be released, including Jimmy Kimmel.
Does that have something to do with the Epstein list that came out?
Feels like
That's supposed to be coming out soon. A lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, are really hoping that doesn't.
All right.
And the headlines went nuts because the easy assumption with that statement is that he's suggesting that Jimmy Kimmel had something to do with Epstein or has invested interest in that list not coming out. Now, when a version of Jeffrey Epstein's list came out, not the whole client list, but a version of it based on a deposition, Jimmy Kimmel bit back hard because his name was not on that list. And on his late night talk show, he called out Aaron Rodgers, all guns blazing. He threatened to sue and spent 7 minutes on his show mocking Aaron Rodgers for the statement. Finally, back on the Pat McAfee show, Aaron Rodgers issued a reaction to the reaction. So people are calling it an apology, but is it an apology? I don't know if it's an apology. We're gonna talk about it in the video when we get to that. Okay, glad we got that out of the way. Now, before we jump into the clips, just one more thing that's really important. This is not a political discussion, at least not for me, because it's pretty obvious in the way that they speak that these two individuals have difference in political opinions, they have difference in opinions on the COVID vaccine, and there are a million places online where you can go talk about those things, but I'm not interested in that aspect of this debate here. This to me is about the behaviors, the original statement, the denial/response, and then the response to that response. There's a lot of interesting stuff with behaviors that we don't need to go into those other topics that are being discussed in so many other places. That being said, let's dive right in.
What happened is he's a Jets quarterback now. He went on a show on ESPN, the Pat McAfee show, and out of the blue insinuated that I was nervous because the Jeffrey Epstein list was coming out. And then it did come out, and of course my name wasn't on it and isn't on it and won't ever be on. I don't know Jeffrey Epstein. I've never met Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not on a list. I was not on a plane or an island or anything ever. And I suggested that if Aaron wanted to make false and very damaging statements like that, that we should do it in court.
Okay, so let's start where all analysis should start by making a few quick notes about baseline. So baseline is the set of behaviors we see on someone in a certain interaction. So in this room, in this conversation, how are they behaving? And we look for things to shift from that. Now for Jimmy Kimmel, the interesting thing is when he's monologuing, it's very likely, in fact, I would bet a ton of money, that his script, which was written by some of his writers, but also I'm sure he contributes to, especially in cases like this, that script is on a prompter that's in front of the camera. So I've worked with these prompters before. They're really, really good. They used to be under the camera. So the person had to do these downwards glances, but now they're literally in front of the lens on this piece of acrylic. They're projected to where the camera can't see it, but I can. So I could be looking right at the lens and still reading my script. And for the most part, he's really, really good, and I've always noticed this, at speaking very naturally with his gestures flowing while looking at those scripts. I mean, he does this for a living and he's good at it. There's going to be one point where it's going to be very obvious in these clips that are about to come up that he's reading a certain segment, and I'm sure I won't even have to say it. You guys are going to notice it, and the moment you do, you're going to go, yeah, okay, he's clearly reading that. However, for the most part, he's very natural with it. Now you'll notice when he is talking that his right hand is in his pocket and he's gesturing with his left hand. This is not rare for him. We often do see this one hand tucked away as he gestures with the left hand. Very common for him. The reason that's important is because if I'm talking to someone and for the most part they're gesturing with both hands and then all of a sudden one of their hands disappears and they're only gesturing with one, I might be interested in why that change happened all of a sudden at that point. But because for him it's very common, it carries almost no weight. Let's talk about one of my favorite things to look out for, and that is the eyebrow flash. So my regular viewers know I pay a lot of attention to eyebrows for good reason. It's one of the body parts that's the most researched in body language all over the world. And we know that in conversation, when we see an eyebrow flash, typically, not always, but typically, it comes down to one of three things. Either it's emphasis, when we emphasize something, either it's some kind of social connection, social approval, or social exchange, like when we greet someone, sometimes we don't even need a hand, or we just kind of use those eyebrows like this. And the third is surprise. When something surprises us, the eyebrows tend to go up. And I'll leave some links in the description where you can look more into the research as to why we know this, but basically it comes down to the fact that we give importance to things with eyebrows. So whether we're emphasizing, greeting someone, or being surprised by something, which basically means, hey, everyone, there might be something here that requests your attention. Now, Jimmy Kimmel is not someone who constantly talks with his eyebrows. Like me, for example. It's very much part of my baseline that when I talk, I emphasize with my eyebrows. But he doesn't. So when it happens, I'm taking note of that because there's something important going on. And in this case, we saw one quite distinct, and there's even a couple of clues that allows us to know which of the three types of eyebrow flash is happening. So it happens when he's talking about Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show, and he says, out of the blue, insinuated, and we see that eyebrow flash. Take a look.
Show, and out of the blue insinuated that I was nervous because the Jeffrey Epstein list was coming out.
So that is quite unmistakably an eyebrow flash of surprise. And the reason I say that, well, there's a few things. First of all, as the eyebrows flash, his head also kicks back. So we're literally taken aback. So with emphasis, we often see this upwards gesture and the tone might go up like this. And there's other things that emphasize that. With social connection, it's usually quite pleasant. But with surprise, it's not rare to see that being taken aback by that as it happens. And we saw that here. After that eyebrow flash, there's a pause. So he insinuated, pause. So just let that sink in for a second. So all these things combined very often happen with the eyebrow flash of surprise. So I think there's a genuine moment here of him kind of expressing once again how surprising that was when he heard that. Following that moment, we get one of the most confident and convincing denials that we've ever looked at in the history of the channel. Forget body language, just listen to his words. It's not just, I've never met Jeffrey Epstein and move on from there. It's the most all-encompassing denial where he denies even the slightest notion of anything. So talking about the list, he says, my name wasn't on it, isn't on it, will never be on it. I don't know Jeffrey Epstein. I never met Jeffrey Epstein. I wasn't on an island or on a plane or anything ever. So that is just so like I've never met this man. I've never been near him, never on a plane. And what's interesting about a denial like this is if this wasn't true, it would be so easy to disprove with one shred of evidence. Even if he once sat at a dinner table with Jeffrey Epstein, even if there was 5 people between them, somebody could just share that picture and go, oh, look at that. You lied. You did know him, you have met him, and the whole thing falls apart. I've spent thousands of hours conducting interviews and studying interrogations, and I've heard a lot of denials. Some really strong and some really weak. And most of the time, there's no absolutes, but most of the time, with a weak denial, they leave themselves a scapegoat, some way out of the statement. So they might say something like, I met the guy a couple of times, but I wouldn't say we're friends. Or I knew him, but I don't remember being on that plane. There's this little way out. But very rarely do we get this kind of didn't happen, not happening, will never happen, I was never here, nor there, nor anywhere, ever. Like this really strong denial that could completely fall apart with the slightest bit of evidence that disproves it. The other thing about it is that he volunteered that denial. The list came out, his name wasn't on it. That's everything we need to know, and that's all he could have said. List came out, my name wasn't on it. But he goes on to deny ever knowing Jeffrey Epstein to any capacity. So if ever on the channel you're looking at a denial, and I say that it's a little weak or lacks confidence, and you want to remember what a strong denial is like, just come back and watch this one, because that is solid. Now we're going to move on and look at the rest of this response and a key assumption that was made that I think really made the whole confrontation much messier. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
I guess believes one of two things. Either he actually believes my name was going to be on Epstein's list, which is insane, or the more likely scenario is he doesn't actually believe that. He just said it because he's mad at me for making fun of his top knot and his lies about being vaccinated. He's particularly upset, I think, because I made fun of the fact that he floated this wacko idea that the UFO sightings that were in the news in February were being reported to distract us from the Epstein list. So he saw that, and maybe to retaliate, he decided to insinuate that I am a pedophile.
There's an interesting eyebrow flash there, just as he's saying that option one is he really thought I was on Epstein's list, which is insane. And we see that eyebrow flash, which is insane. And this is one of the ones I was talking about earlier where it's a little ambiguous because it can be surprise once again because he's saying it's insane. It's so surprising, but this can also be emphasis. He could be just emphasizing how insane that is. So you can go, whatever that person says, that's insane. And you could still emphasize that way. But it's important to remember that both surprise and emphasis with the eyebrows are rooted in the same place, which is giving importance to something. Whether you're emphasizing it or going, oh my God, something here needs our attention, the eyebrows are going up for that same reason. We're signaling. We signal a lot with the eyebrows. So in either case, this insane is quite convincing because either it's shocking to him or he's emphasizing how insane it is to think he would be associated with that list. However, the most important thing that I caught in what he just said is not about behavior. It's about a fallacy in logic. And when I brought it up to a couple of people, they were like, oh my God, yeah, we didn't notice that. And it's the following. His entire argument that he just made is based on an assumption that is incorrect. Because he said there are two options. The first option is that he really thinks I'm on that list. And option two is he knows I'm not on that list, but he just said that I'm on that list. The problem is this. No, he didn't. He never said that Jimmy Kimmel was on that list.
A lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, are really hoping that doesn't happen.
All right.
So the assumption we can make there is that he's saying that, oh, he's nervous because he's on the list, but he never said he's on the list. So this argument that Jimmy Kimmel is presenting is based on a false assumption. Mind you, a lot of people, myself included, made that assumption at first. When he made that statement, the easy place your mind goes is, oh my God, Jimmy Kimmel doesn't want the list to come out. Why? Who does he know? Who is he involved with? And this is why critical thinking is so important. Because if we just jump to a conclusion and we just stay stuck there and now we defend that because we don't want to feel like we were wrong, that's just subjective and polarized. But if we just back up and go, okay, well, hold on. What else could have been meant? We start to realize certain things, which is what's going to happen as we keep going with these clips.
Aaron Rodgers has a very high opinion of himself because he had success on the football field. He believes himself to be an extraordinary being. He genuinely thinks that because God gave him the ability to throw a ball. He's smarter than everyone else. We learned during COVID, somehow he knows more about science than scientists. A guy who went to community college, then got into Cal on a football scholarship and didn't graduate, someone who never spent a minute studying the human body, is an expert in the field of immunology. I looked it up. This is actually a thing. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with limited competence in a particular domain overestimate their abilities. In other words, Aaron Rodgers is too arrogant to know how ignorant he is. And can you imagine that this hamster-brained man thinks he knows what the government is up to because he's a quarterback doing research on YouTube?
Did you catch it? Tell me you guys caught it. So when he was talking about Dunning-Kruger, he was 100% reading that off the teleprompter. I don't know how much of the rest is scripted and how much he goes off script. It seems like a lot of it is a script that has been written by him and his team, but that Dunning-Kruger is like, okay, there's definitely a monitor right there in front of the lens because, again, notice how he's not looking down and reading that definition. He's looking right into the lens and reading that definition. My comments on the segment we just looked at are going to be a little bit less about behavior and a little bit more about something I rarely talk about because I'm going to talk about my moral opinion about one of the things that was said. And the reason for it is because I do believe that it plays into the psychology of this back and forth a lot. So this is going to be a bit like a roller coaster because there's things about this that I agree with and others that I disagree with. And it's funny because every now and then I'll get a comment on my videos where someone's like, you know, you're going back and forth, just pick a side. And that always makes me laugh because this is a subjective, biased person not realizing how polarized they are. I don't want to pick a side. That's not the goal of analysis. The goal of analysis is to look at it from both sides objectively to try to see what's going on because most things are not all good or all bad. Most things exist in a gray area. So in this case, he starts off by saying that Aaron Rodgers has intellectual ego, that because he's found enormous success on a football field, he believes that that translates and that he's really smart and knows about everything. In my experience, listening to Aaron Rodgers talk, it does seem like he puts a lot of weight on his own conclusions. That every now and then he has these theories and he talks about them very certainly and very passionately. And this tends to rub certain people the wrong way. But then he proceeds to make fun of the guy because he went to community college and he can't possibly be smart enough to understand certain things. And I thought that that was a very low blow and very uncalled for. I know brilliant people who have gone to community college. I know brilliant people who dropped out of high school. And to equate someone's level of education to how intelligent they are or how valid their opinion is, I think is a very false equivalence. If you want to pick apart certain specific things he's saying, like you were doing up until that point, and let us conclude that, yeah, this guy jumps to a lot of conclusions, that's fine. Let us get there. But to equate a community college education to not being intelligent, I don't know. Not to mention that a comment like this can polarize people because it can get Aaron Rodgers fans to go, whoa, that was really uncalled for. Look what Jimmy Kimmel did, no, and just contributes to the argument as opposed to saying, here's what he said, that was wrong, and let us form our conclusions. Now, I'm going to debate myself on that by saying that it's possible that he meant he went to community college and then he went to university on a football scholarship and dropped out. In a way of saying that he never studied immunology, he never studied medicine. He just went to community college, then he went to university, and he dropped out. But there would have been a way of saying that without making it seem like you're equating community college to a lack of intelligence, especially because it's not like he misspoke or blurted something out. This seems to be, for the most part, written. So that was written in. That dig on community college, that was written in. Now, what he says about Dunning-Kruger and someone who thinks they have all the answers because they did research on YouTube, I can absolutely relate to. I get that. It's a frustration I've had for a very long time, and it's very present in today's world of social media. So anyone who's watching this, who is a professional in any field, knows the frustration of the Dunning-Kruger. So, you know, whether it's a doctor who's having a conversation with someone who watched an episode of Grey's Anatomy and is trying to lecture them about surgery, or a lawyer who is talking to someone who's watched an episode of Law and Order and is trying to tell them how a courtroom works. But even for me, whether it's as a mentalist or behavioral analyst, I'll get people who read an article in Psychology Today or watched an episode of Lie to Me or The Mentalist, and they'll say something like, oh yeah, good, I saw the person I was talking to, their eyes went like this, and when they do that, they're lying, so I knew they were lying. Or even with mentalism, like, oh, you're implanting this in their head because I saw it on the mentalist with the way that he talks. And it's like, no, that's just not the way it works. And so yeah, we are in a world where people tend to drastically overvalue their competence in something based on just having read a couple of little things. And that's what the Dunning-Kruger effect is. It's that when we gain a little bit of knowledge, we gain an enormous amount of confidence. And then as we gain more knowledge, we start to realize, okay, we don't know that much. And then at the end, we start to gain a little more knowledge again. So I totally understand the frustration of someone saying that non-experts should not talk about something like they are experts. And we all need to realize that the research that we're doing online is as valid as the next guy's. We're all reading different things and we're all just trying our best to figure it out. He even goes on to say, and we're going to see it right now, that he doesn't believe athletes should only talk about sports, that everyone should be able to express their opinions as long as it's clear that these are just opinions. So yeah, a lot of ups and downs in this clip. There's a lot of the messaging I agree with, but I think there's a derogatory or insulting way it's being delivered that isn't necessary to get this point across, and it's diluting the conversation.
I'm not one of those people who thinks athletes and members of the sports media should stick to talking about sports. I think Aaron Rodgers has the right to express any opinion he wants to, but saying someone is a pedophile is not an opinion. And as far as the, well, you say things about people all the time argument goes, it's not even close to the same. We say a lot of things on this show. We don't make up lies. In fact, we have a team of people who work very hard to sift through facts and reputable sources before I make a joke. And that's an important distinction, a joke about someone. And when I do get something wrong, which happens on rare occasions, you know what I do? I apologize for it, which is what Aaron Rodgers should do, which is what a decent person would do, but I bet he won't. If he does, you know what I'll do? I'll accept his apology and move on. But he probably won't do that. My guess is he won't apologize.
Okay, back to psychology. At the end of that clip, he does something that I don't know if he thought of this or his producers thought of this or his writers thought of this, but it's very clever psychologically. And it's a variation of what we call in psychology or in hypnotherapy, a double bind. So a double bind is, for example, when a parent tells a child, do you want to go to bed now or in 15 minutes? As opposed to saying, go to bed or you're going to bed soon, because that could be encountered with a, no, I don't want to, no. With that double bind, the kid makes a decision, but both of those decisions lead to the kid going to bed and the parent getting the desired outcome while trying to avoid confrontation. Similarly, in hypnotherapy, we often say things like, and I wonder if you feel that relaxation more in your left leg or in your right leg. So notice how we're not saying you're feeling relaxed, because then the mind can go, no, I'm really not. But if we say it that way, the mind goes, oh yeah, I guess my left leg does feel a little more relaxed. And now we've paved the way towards relaxation. So a double bind is any situation where, regardless of which option the person chooses, it moves towards the desired outcome. So in this case, he makes a prediction. He goes, Aaron Rodgers is not going to apologize. That's the way I think it's going to play out. And he really doubles down on that. He says it a couple of times. I don't think he's going to apologize. It would be really nice. I'll accept it, but he's not going to do it. Now think about the scenario this sets up. One of two things is going to happen. Either Aaron Rodgers is going to apologize, whether it's to prove him wrong or sincerely because he means it, he's going to apologize, and that works out for Jimmy Kimmel because he's absolved, that's put to bed, the rumor's gone. Or he doesn't apologize, and it just makes it seem like Jimmy Kimmel has a read on this guy, he's got him all figured out, and everything he just said is right, and even predicted that the guy's not even going to apologize. So he sets this up in such a way that regardless of what happens, it works out in his favor. So now let's see what did happen.
Listen, I think we should just get into it, though, just so we can have the woke establishment who's just tuned in for this part. Let's just get this out of the way first, then they can move on with the rest of the day, and we can all move past this. I'd really like to get into this, and then let's just move on. So the history of this goes back to COVID times, right? And in COVID times, he mentioned on his show jokes about my immunization, which I know you also made a little joke about it. I'm not going to get into that whole thing. I've talked many times about that, but I made a joke about that, and the fact that, my own research. He didn't just stop there, though. He made a lot of other comments about unvaccinated people. Fast forward to, again, unprompted. We're talking on our show, as we do, about a lot of different topics. Somehow the Epstein client list comes up. And I said, it's interesting, and there were for a long time. Even still, there hasn't been a list that's been released. There's been one person's, uh, you know, deposition from a 2015 case.
Okay, so a lot going on here. Right off the bat, we could see that this man speaks in a way that's naturally polarizing, because he says right in the beginning, almost uncalled for, that, let's just get this over with so that the woke establishment who tuned in just for this can just watch this and get along with their day. So he's unnecessarily calling out this demographic and excluding himself from it. With the body language, something I took note of was the licking of the lips. So this is not a man who's constantly licking his lips. Sometimes we see people who are very stressed, and when we're stressed, the mouth dries out, so they're constantly licking the lips or moistening the lips. That's not what he does. He does something else that's rather common. It's often on TV, often in interviews, just before he's about to go into something. And there's like this, okay, here we go, moment. We see that lick lip, just before he's about to start something. And we call this the lip licking of grooming. So when we lick the lips, it brings more color to the lips and makes us more presentable. So we often see this just before we start something. Then something really interesting happens with his verbal behaviors, where the number of times he says, multiplies. So up until this point, he had said, he says it every now and then when he needs a second. But at this segment, when he's talking about his immunization, he repeats things a lot and he says, a lot.
I'm not going to get into that whole thing. I've talked many times about that, but I made a joke about that, and the fact that, my own research, he didn't just stop there though.
He also says that Jimmy Kimmel made a joke about my immunization and the fact that my own research, and he doesn't finish that sentence. If you go back and listen to it, there's a sentence he just doesn't complete. And he goes, but it didn't stop there, and he continues from there. But he doesn't finish that sentence. So, and there's also a nervous chuckle there when he goes, I'm not going to get into that whole thing, and we get this nervous chuckle. So we very often talk on the channel about cognitive load and how when we need time to think, our speech slows down and we start to hear things like verbal leaks, which is hesitation, or we hear speech disfluency. That's when we don't complete sentences or our speech falls apart and our words are getting muttered. And I also talk about something called fluff, which is these filler words, like what I mean, that kind of thing. So in this moment, we're getting a verbal signal that something's going on, that cognitive load, that brain is really working overtime. The confidence in his tone in this segment is significantly different from elsewhere, even within that same interview. So this is breaking baseline. And there's a very good reason that his brain is overworking here and he's struggling to come up with the right words and ultimately doesn't even finish a sentence. And that reason is that a lot of the jokes and criticism were not about his immunization, but about the fact that he was deceptive about his immunization. He came out and confessed that in the midst of COVID, he was purposely misleading and deceptive about his immunization. And there was a lot of people on both sides of the debate that just couldn't get behind the deceptive element of it.
Then we fast forward to this last week, right? And I said that a lot of people, and I'm quoting myself here, a lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, are really hoping that doesn't come out. End quote. That's what I said. That's the entire quote. Okay? I was referring to the fact that if there is a list, which again, this hasn't come out yet, this was just a deposition, right? And there are names on it, then that would be the second time that a soft brain, junior college student, conspiracy theorist, MAGA, whatever other things have been said by him and other people in the media would be right twice. I totally understand how serious an allegation of pedophilia would be. So for him to be upset about that, I get it. Did you watch the quote? Because that's exactly what I said. Verbatim what I said on the show. I'm not stupid enough to accuse you of that with absolutely zero evidence, concrete evidence. That's ridiculous. So I'm glad, and I think we can agree on something, is that one, those crimes are heinous, and two, I'm glad you're not on the list because those those who are on the list, and this is what I think we can agree on, that at minimum, there should be an inquiry into their involvement.
Okay, now we're once again getting a deviation from baseline with a behavior that we see not just once, but twice. In the beginning, just before he says what he said, we see 2 lip compressions. So he goes, I said, lip compression, that, another lip compression, and then he goes on to say what he said.
And I said that.
But again, there's distance there, there's fluff, because he goes, and I'm quoting myself here, and he laughs. And we see that lip compression with that hesitation. Even the head is stalling, and there's the speech is dragged and slow. It's taking him a minute to get to that statement. And I think the reason for this is simple. Lip compressions typically have to do with either a withheld opinion or disagreement. So you might have 2 people arguing about something and you're just like this because you're just holding it in, or you disagree with something but you don't want to say it. So very often with something we don't really want to say. And in this case, I think it's simply that. I think he came to realize the way what he said looks and how it could be interpreted. So it's taking him a second here to go, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best way to phrase that. That's why we're seeing all this stuff. But at the very least, we are getting some clarification here pertaining to what we were talking about earlier. He's not doing an extraordinarily good job at explaining this, but what he's saying is that he never called Jimmy Kimmel a P word. He simply said that Jimmy Kimmel would not be happy when this list comes out, and here's clarifying that the reason for that is because on numerous occasions when Aaron has said something, people have said he's wrong and he's uneducated, doesn't know anything, but when this list comes out, it'll prove that he was right, and Jimmy Kimmel wouldn't want that. That's the part of what Jimmy Kimmel wouldn't want. He wouldn't want something that Aaron Rodgers said to come out as being correct. So this is not about Jimmy Kimmel being a P word, this is about Aaron Rodgers being right. And that's why I did the whole segment earlier about Jimmy Kimmel talking about Aaron's intellectual arrogance, because we're getting glimmers of that here as well. The whole point is, I said this was gonna happen, that's gonna turn out to be right. Jimmy Kimmel won't be happy that I was right. It's a lot of focus on him proving that his conclusions are correct. Before I tell you the thing that for me was missing from that segment, let's look at this last clip.
Still haven't popped a bottle because there hasn't been any list that's come out. And I'm glad that Jimmy is not on the list. I really am. And I don't think he's the P word. And you know, I think it's impressive that a man who went to Arizona State and has 10 joke writers can read off a prompter. So I wish him the best. Again, I don't give a shit what he says about me. But as long as he understands what I actually said and that I'm not accusing him of being on a list, then I'm all for moving forward.
Oh man, some fantastic body language on this one. So first, it's comical how he says there hasn't been a list, and then immediately after goes, I'm glad Jimmy is not on the list. That's such a contradicting statement. So there hasn't been a list, but I'm glad he's not on the list. That doesn't exist. So I suppose what he's saying is like there hasn't been an official list, but I'm glad Jimmy's name wasn't on whatever version of the list we have. It was just a funny way to say it. So when he says he's glad that Jimmy Kimmel isn't on the list, he goes, I really am. And his affirmation, his head bob affirmation is very synced with the statement that he's making. And it's a very direct statement. So I tend to believe that. He even goes on to say that I don't believe he's the P word. And he distances there, he softens it. He used the actual word earlier a couple of times, but in this case, he's not saying it because he's saying, I don't believe he's that, and he's softening the word to kind of just overall have a softer image here. However, it is a little bit odd for him to say, I'm glad that Jimmy's not on the list, because he just made a point of saying that he never suggested he was on the list, and everyone who thought that that's what he was saying was way off. He would never make that statement. So why would he now say, I'm glad he wasn't on the list? He was never supposed to be on the list. The only reason anybody thought that he might be on the list is because it seems like you suggested it. So it's a bizarre thing to say, I'm glad he wasn't on the list. Why would he be? So that's just confusing, but it doesn't really indicate anything specific. What is indicative is what happens next. So after he says, I'm glad he's not on the list, I really am, I don't think he's a P word, we see something. Everything stalls, we see this hesitation, we can almost hear the hesitation there. Then we see a lip lick. And remember with him, very often we see those lip licks right before something important. So it's almost a nonverbal, here we go, so something's coming. Then immediately after that, we see twice those lips compress. And on the second one, even a little bit on the first one, but a lot more obviously on the second one, it looks a lot like a mouth shrug. Because it's not just that thinning of the lips, it's also rising like this. And we could really see it a lot more on that second one. Now there's a lot of really great research on shrugging from the Université Paris-Nanterre. And basically a shrugging can involve a lot of body parts, hands, shoulders, mouth, eyebrows, even a head tilt. And all shrugs denote a lack of something. I don't care, I'm not doing that, I couldn't agree more, I don't have anything to add. So a lot of different meanings. But one of them is, I don't know if I should. So I don't know if I want to, I don't know if I should. And in this moment, I think that's what it is. I think we're getting this moment of like, should I do this? I don't know if I should do this, because we're ending here with a jab. After kind of settling this a little bit, saying his piece, saying, I don't think he's a P word, clarifying what he meant. Now he's about to give it one last jab about, I'm really surprised that someone with that education can read all those teleprompters that his team wrote for him. So I think there's a moment of pause before that jab where he's like, I can end this. This can end right now. Do I throw in this extra jab? And then he just decides to go with it. But we certainly see quite a bit of hesitation right before that last jab comes out. So to quickly wrap up, just this Aaron Rodgers segment really quick, we are seeing him kind of clarify things, saying, I didn't think he was a P word. Why would I think that without any evidence? Trying to clarify certain things. We do see quite a lot of stress when it came time to repeat what he had said. So obviously he knows that it was a bit of a misstep there. The one thing that I think was missing was a flat out sincere apology. To just say, because here's the thing. We saw the stress of him repeating what he said. We saw him say that, this is a serious accusation. So if Jimmy Kimmel is upset, I understand that. So there's some understanding there. And it would have been nice for him to go, I really didn't mean that, but I could see how that's the way that was interpreted. And I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to say that. And ultimately, he took the path of proving Jimmy Kimmel right in that he didn't apologize. And the point Jimmy Kimmel was trying to make is he has this stubbornness to him, and maybe it could be reflected as such, that he never just flat out said, listen, man, I get it. The way I said it kind of insinuated that, and I'm sorry for everyone, not just necessarily to Jimmy, but if anyone misunderstood what I was saying, I'm sorry about that miscommunication. But my overall opinion of this whole thing, after all is said and done, is that it's this giant miscommunication. He said something that could be misinterpreted. Jimmy Kimmel misunderstood that along with a whole bunch of us. He went on the attack. In that segment, it was clear that there was a misunderstanding on what Aaron Rodgers was trying to say, and the whole thing is just snowballing from there. It doesn't help that they fundamentally disagree about a lot of things, and that's just adding to the darts that they're throwing at each other. But ultimately, I think it was just a big misunderstanding, and I think an apology would have been nice. But this is one of those topics where some viewers are going to look at it and go, no, what Jimmy interpreted in what Aaron said is very justified, and Aaron owes him an apology. And some are going to say, no, Aaron didn't mean it that way. It was a misinterpretation, so he doesn't owe an apology. All he owed was a clarification. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So in the comments, without making it too political and about the political aspects of this discussion, let me know what you think. Was this just a misunderstanding and Aaron, all he had to do was clarify? Or was it reasonable to think that he was insinuating something pretty intense and that he should have apologized along with the clarification? Let me know in the comments what you thought, and I will see you on the next one.